It's time for another edition. It's the next video, as I said in the last video. Today is January 17th, 2024, and it is a very, very cold January day here in New York City. So I read the comments, and I wanted to address a couple of questions. The first question was posted by God is Good, or at least the handle at God is Good. I don't know at God is Good's real name, but I appreciate the question. She wanted to know about Georgette. That was my grandfather's third wife, actually, third and final wife, Georgette Varette. So she was of French origin, or her ancestry was of French origin. She was pretty much an all-American girl, but her ancestry was French. Don't know that much about her family. I know she had a sister. Didn't really talk about her. We didn't really talk about her family that much. Of course, by the time we started conversing, Georgette was, I mean, she was a grown woman already at least in her 50s, so living a life. So God is Good wanted to know if Georgette followed the same dietary regime as Bernando did. So this is a great question because it really opens up the floor for a lot of different aspects on Bernardo's personality, actually. So Georgette was very fond of food, maybe too fond of food. She used to overeat. At least when I knew her, she overate a lot. She would eat, according to my grandfather, she would put like, sticks or multiple sticks of butter. If she were making a sauce, she would not be satisfied with maybe, 2 scoops of ice cream or maybe 3, but she would eat like gallons. She would go through, half gallons of ice cream voraciously, and so on and so forth. And also, she didn't have the exercise routine that grandpa had, and I don't actually know. It's not like I spied on my grandparents, but I don't actually know, um, how many vegetables and things like that she ate. She was a waitress. She was a professional waitress in New York City. She was a very, very good one. She was very swift on her feet. Uh, and she used to work at all the best delicatessens and delis in New York City. I don't know if anyone here remembers a place called Wolf's Delicatessen, but they did huge business, and they were located on the corner of 57th Street. Was it 57th and 5th, or maybe it was 57th and 6th, but that was a big deal working there. So she worked at all the top places. She was a great waitress. She was very affectionate with her customers. She was very, very speedy. One day I went to go meet her. I think I was going to go meet her. Maybe we were going to go somewhere after work, or maybe I just stopped by to say hello. And so she sat me down in a booth, and I waited. I think I might have ordered something, but I waited, and I just watched her in fascination as she sped, all throughout this restaurant, and was personal with everyone. And of course, these are the days when you wrote all the orders by hand and did the mouth calculation by hand, and you had to hand one ticket to the, uh, to the cooks, right? You put the ticket up on the thing, and the cook looks at it and he reads it, and then your order comes up, he rings a bell, and you come and pick it up and deliver it to the table. So, you're delivering, and you're also busting the tables, and you're also doing the math and all of that. So, Georgette and I, sometimes she would take me out sometimes to different restaurants, different favorite restaurants of hers. She was very fond of Polynesian food. I remember that. She took me to one of her favorite Polynesian restaurants. So, she liked rich, kind of spicy foods and so on and so forth. And it's okay. But she did not follow the, she didn't follow Grandpa's diet. Now, this says a lot about my grandfather, actually, because my grandfather, he was very self-satisfied and he was very, very content to do his own thing. He didn't need any outside validation from anyone. He'd already been mocked, when he was a seaman by his peers, saying that he was, a sissy or whatever they called him, because he ate vegetables and didn't hang out in bars all night and, was very regulated about what he did. But he didn't care. He totally did not care. My grandfather was extremely secure in himself. And I do believe that's because he had a very strong bond with his father. I mean, they had a very, very strong bond. They were very close. He looked up to his dad. He wanted to be like his dad. He wanted to make his dad proud. And that was it. Now, again, I want to point out that my grandfather was not a vegan. He was a pescatarian. He ate fish. He was a seaman. He actually even owned a couple of fish and chips businesses over the years. A fish and chips business, he had one in New Haven, and he had another one, I think, down in Asbury Park for a while. And he might have even had another one. I think he was telling me about a fish and chips place he had on Jackson Avenue. I think that might be, okay, I'm not quite sure. I remember Jackson Avenue, not sure if that's Jersey City, not sure if that's Asbury Park, but my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He always had a side hustle going, always. All right, but getting back to Georgette and them differing. So even though they were married for 50 years, they got married in the late 1950s. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but I do remember they met at a party. I think he appreciated her sense of humor, and her sincerity with him. So he told her, if you're the real thing, you're not going to have to worry about another thing for the rest of your life. And so he took his vows very seriously, to be a provider for her and a protector. Even though she worked and all that, my grandfather took care of, a lot of the stuff around the house. I think there's some things that they split, or maybe that she paid for, but he took care of business. So he did not impose his diet on Georgette. And I remember asking him about that once, and he said, "Oh, well, she's French. They like those creams and sauces." Now, of course, he knew what he was talking about because Bernando was trained at the Sorbonne when in the culinary arts, right? He went to Paris and he studied the culinary arts back in, like the late 20s. So he knew how to make all those sauces and creams and do all those things. He knew how to do that. And even though that was his profession, he didn't indulge in that stuff personally. Why? Because his father told him to do differently. By the same token, if he was serving guests, he knew how to serve. He was a wonderful host. I mean, if you went to his home, I mean, he could make you whatever you wanted to have. But when it came to himself, he ate at his own regulated time, regardless. He didn't care what anybody else did. He ate at his fixed times every day, and he ate in very moderate portions. And what else? Now I've lost my train of thought because I'm looking at these comments, and the comments are throwing off my train of thought. But at any rate, I just want to continue with this story about Georgette, and then I will look at the questions and answer them at the end, okay? Because I want to answer this question that God is good. That's their handle. Asked me. So years go by, they're married. Georgette has an accident one day at work. She slips on something. It does like a split. Now you can imagine, like a 60 something year old woman who may not be the most limber, that happening to. It really did a number on her back. And because of that, her back was so injured that she actually became bedridden, right? That was sort of the end of her work life, very abruptly. So my grandfather, carried the burden of her care and maintaining her. Unfortunately, Georgette did not modify her eating habits while she was in that condition. So she continued to eat gallons of ice cream. I remember opening up the ice box and seeing, vanilla ice cream, like half gallons of, vanilla ice cream. And she continued to consume, large quantities of butter and all of these different things, which, of course, not being able to get any exercise, she got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where she actually ballooned up to 300 pounds. So she went from being a, reasonable sized middle-aged woman to being, oh my God, let me think. She wasn't that tall. Maybe she was like 5'6", kind of average height, 5'5", 5'6", and being 300 pounds and not getting any exercise and being bedridden. So people had to come and do her hair, and she had to be, bathed. My grandfather would do that, and all these different things had to be done for her. The effect of eating these extremely fatty foods, a little fat's good for you, but if you're going to consume a half a gallon of ice cream, in a sitting, and you're going to do that on a regular basis, and then you're going to do that 2 times a week or 3 times a week, right? Her friends would come and bring her this stuff. My grandfather wouldn't buy that stuff for her. Her friends would come and bring her that stuff. Actually, he may have, but in general, she had people coming over and they would bring her, her supplies, as it were. It eventually had the effect of really destroying her gastrointestinal system, to the point where she started to get ulcers, very bad ulcers inside. Eventually, it ended up disintegrating her intestines, and she had to be rushed to the hospital one time because she was hemorrhaging internally, because there was kind of nothing, there was really nothing left. So also, the other thing that happened is that it seems, as I understood, if I understood my grandfather correctly, that all that eating, of this type of food also eventually kind of disintegrated her spine, her spinal cord. So eventually she had to have a surgery to put in a rod, right, to replace her spine, so she could sit up, so she could stand. So clearly Georgette had some kind of an eating disorder. So I always like to say, my grandfather was a picture of health, and my my step grandmother, my grandmother Georgette, was like the picture of unhealth. They were like night and day, these two. But he, again, he didn't get angry at her. He wished that she would eat a different way, but he just said, well, she's French, right? She's attached to this kind of eating. And I just thought that that was very amazing about him. Now, for those people who are asking about my grandfather's diet, if you go to the link in the header, of this channel, it will lead you to the website. And on the website, there is a post about my grandfather's daily habits, his menu, and his regime. So if you please go there, you can read all about it. It's all written out. Okay, I wrote that out for everyone, about 5 years ago now, because people kept asking about it. So it's posted on the website. If you have a hard time and you can't find that, you can go ahead and look that up. So Okay, so moving on with this Georgette story. So at any rate, eventually what ended up happening was is that she ended up being put on a lot of uh, medications, and a lot of medications, a whole hell of a lot of medications. So what ended up, I mean, like, this is back in, oh my God, this is back in, like the late like 80s, 90s, so many medications. And my grandfather said, I have to leave New York and move somewhere where it's less expensive because I cannot financially keep up with all these medications. It's costing me hundreds of dollars a month. So I think at that point, he was paying something like $800 a month. You can imagine, right, with inflation, how much that would be now for Georgette's medications that the doctors had her on, all the stuff, right? So they ended up leaving New York City and they ended up moving to North Carolina because they were able to get a ranch style house that was, very inexpensive. That was maybe a third of the cost of an apartment here in New York City at the time. And, were able to live there comfortably and all of that. So my grandfather, you know, try to make a go of that lifestyle there. And they were there for, I'd say about 5, 6 years or so, until it got to the point where it became clear that this was not going to be a place that Grandpa was going to thrive in. My grandfather was kind of like a shark. And what I mean by that is that he needed mental stimulation. Um, he needed to feel mentally stimulated. He needed that. We all need that, but he was very aware of the fact that he needed that. And he was gradually becoming very bored there because he used to say, I have got more books in my library here at home than they do at the public library in this town. And then also he became frustrated because the people there also were very set in their ways. They really were not interested in changing their habits or their lifestyle. They were not very receptive, to eating more fresh foods and so on. If anyone has been to North Carolina, they're very attached to barbecue. They eat a lot of meat there, and sugary things, and um, that definitely was not him. And so he found that the initiatives that he wanted to take in terms of starting his own business there, like a lunch business, it just wasn't working. So eventually he ended up getting an offer to move further west to Arizona, which is the last place that he lived for the last 13 years of his life. And that was a much better place for him because people were more into uh, a healthier lifestyle, right? One of the places and that he liked to hang out and go once a month because they had a potluck was a very nice couple named oh my God, I why am I spacing out on her name? Anyway, it was a very nice couple that lived in Dobbs Ranch, and they used to host a vegan potluck once a month. And they put a little advertisement in the local paper, and he was reading the paper, and he thought to himself, "Oh, these are people that I need to be with." So I think this is where the confusion, thinking that my grandfather was a vegan, comes in, because again, he was a pescatarian. But that being said, he certainly appreciated being around people that enjoyed, appreciated, incorporated, and ate plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables into their lifestyle. Um, so while he was in transition, making this move, right, deciding that he was going to make this move when he was about 100 years old at this point, that is when he gave Georgette an ultimatum. So he basically carried the burden and suffered with her self-inflicted health problems because of her inability to, you know, control her eating habits, which were literally to her physical detriment. So he told her, he was like, okay, listen, I have spent, decades, years now, taking care of you, and you're not changing. If you do not change, I'm going to leave you here in North Carolina, and I'm going to put you in a nursing home because I can't physically carry this burden anymore. I can't do it anymore. This is him at like 100. He was still full of a lot of pep and vim and vigor, but he had felt, and he told me once, that he had wasted the best years of his life taking care of her. Now, when my grandfather was talking about the best years of his life, mind you, he was talking about his 80s. He was talking about his 80s and his 90s, okay? This wasn't someone who was like in their 40s saying, oh, the best years of my life are in my 20s. Or this wasn't someone in their 60s saying, oh, I wasted the best years of my life that were in my 40s or my 30s. This was a 100-year-old man saying that he had wasted the best years of his life in his 80s and his 90s. Basically, you know, being in a situation that was really, really dysfunctional. So at any rate, that's what he told her. And he's like, is that what you want? She's like, oh, no, 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 because, they've been together for so long. And in spite of her foibles, Georgette was very, very attached to my grandfather, okay? So he said, all right, well, I'm leaving, I'm going to go, I'm going to set up things there. But when you come, when I get you out of here and you come to Arizona, you're going to do what I say now. Now you're going to live the way I say now. I'm putting my foot down. I've had enough now. And she, of course, she agreed. So she spent about 6 months in a nursing home somewhere in North Carolina. And then finally he sent for her. And he said it was like an ordeal trying to get her on the plane because she was like 300 pounds, and had to be wheeled in. It was like a drama, right? So when he got her to Mesa, Arizona, and they were installed, he said, okay, now I'm going to change your diet, right? You've done everything your way, the way you've wanted to do for your whole life. Look at this mess that it's gotten us in. Look at the mess that it's gotten you in. Now we're going to do things my way. He said, so you were going to be, he could put her on a diet of steamed vegetables for one. So she would have, steamed carrots, steamed broccoli. That's sticking out in my mind, very much. He had her on, of course, the superfood smoothies, right? So he basically put her on, not exactly a raw diet, because it doesn't seem to me that her system would have been able to take to that. That would have been a big shock for her because, mind you now, she was full of toxins. She was full of toxins from eating that way for literally decades, right? So he said to her, I'm going to clean you out. And he said, it's going to be messy because, of course, she wasn't able to stand up easily, by herself and move around because she was overweight. This impressed me so much about my grandfather. He took care of her as if she were a baby, right? So he put her on the bowel detox. You all hear me talking about Dr. Schultz's detoxes, and the first thing that you should do is the bowel detox, right? Because you want to get all that stuff out, before you do any other detoxes. Because if you do the other detoxes and your bowels aren't clean, you're gonna feel pretty lousy, while you're doing your other detoxes. So he explained to me that there were, there was feces everywhere. There was like a lot of defecation because there was just like, mind you, she was 300 pounds, and most of that weight, where was it? It was in her colon. It was in her large intestine and in her colon. It's crazy how much the large intestines and the small intestines can expand and how much literal crap that they can hold, and all that stuff can just be stuck to your insides. So, he did that, and I take it that that went on for quite some time, probably several months, and then, weaning her off all this thing that, this diet, and just getting her back in shape, bathing her, cleaning up after her, feeding her. He was incredible. My grandfather was doing this in his hundreds, and taking care of himself. And of course, he had his usual uh thing where, people were coming over and, having their superfood and all that type of stuff that he was selling to people, in person. So that's what happened. So no, Georgette did not follow his diet until she was literally in a dire situation and was overweight, bedridden, and was going to be left stranded in a nursing home if she, didn't agree and or wasn't willing to finally change and do things in a different way. So I'm happy to say that when I went to go visit them, let me see now, must have been about 2006, about that time. I went out there. I hadn't seen Georgette, and I hadn't seen him, and I hadn't seen them in years. But I was able to afford to go out there then and spend some time with them. And I was amazed when I saw Georgette. I was amazed because she was slim. She was actually able to walk with the use of a walker, mind you, but before she wasn't able to walk at all. And she was the size, that she was, I'm sure that she was as a young woman. So he had managed to get her to shed, I would say, probably about 175 pounds, How much do I'm just going to guesstimate how much I think she weighed about. I'd say she probably weighed about 125 pounds, 130 pounds, down from about, 300 pounds or more. That's quite something. So that was much better. And there you go. Now, Georgette ended up living to be in her 80s, in her mid to late 80s. I don't have the documents with me here right now because a lot of my belongings are tucked away somewhere. So normally I would just like pull out my box and, pull out the paper and read all that, because I have the will and the funeral arrangements that my grandfather made for himself and for her when he was 107 years old. Okay. He must have had an intuition about that, because Georgette passed away a couple of years later, sadly. She was in a doctor's office getting a checkup. She wasn't that stable because, remember, she was using a walker, and she was a lot frailer. And they put her on the scale to take her weight. But the attendant or the nurse or whoever it was, instead of staying there with her, to make sure that she was all right, walked out of the room. Georgette lost her balance. She fell. She split her head open, had to be taken to the hospital, and spent, her last weeks in the hospital with my grandfather going every single day, mind you, to make sure that she was okay, because they were not taking care of her properly in the hospital. She was lying in her own urine and her own feces. And of course, this was absolutely horrifying for my grandfather, who could not wrap his mind around this at all. My grandfather was very, very clean, and he was very concerned with health, and I mean, with his own patients and everything. He would never, never leave anyone in a situation like that, ever. So here was a man who's lived his whole life on the principles of health, right? And wellness and lifestyle and exercise and cleanliness and all of that, to find his wife in this state when he goes to the hospital, you know. So this was a very stressful time for him. And he used to go every day and spend a couple of hours with her every day to make sure that she was being fed and that she was clean and that she was being turned over. Because if you stay in bed in one position for too long, you get bed sores, right? So anyone who's worked in nursing knows about this. You have to make sure you know that the patient is rotated and is moved. Yeah, the hospitals are notoriously dirty places. And then I remember him saying to me that she said to him at one point, she said, I don't think I'm gonna make it, love. And he said, oh no, don't say that, you know, but you know, she knew how she felt, and she passed like that. So there you go. That's the story of Georgette. So my grandfather's philosophy, or my philosophy for that matter, is, you know, you don't want to be a burden on anyone, right? He never wanted to be a burden on anyone in any way, not financially, not emotionally, you know, physically, none of that. He said, if I ever get to that point where I'm like that, that's when I'm checking out, you know? Uh, so, which actually, that's what he did. That's what he did. And I should clarify that by saying, I might have said this in an earlier video, or maybe a video I did a couple of years ago. You know, when my grandfather got to the point where he felt that he was not going to be um, as independent, you know, as he had always been, he just made the decision and he left his body December 19th. I mean, people can die when they want to. You know, you see that with animals. Any of you have ever had animals that maybe just got depressed, or maybe they had a buddy, you know, that they're with, and then a few days later they were gone, you know. Um, well, that's my point of view anyway. So, you know, at that point, my grandfather had lost his oldest daughter, my mother. They were very, very close. They'd had plans to do different things together. And, you know, once she was gone, you know, that was very, very heartbreaking for him. He could not understand that. He wanted to know why God didn't take him first, because he's like, you know, I've lived over 100 years. Why her? And all the rest of it. That's the only time that I saw my grandfather get old. And not old in the sense that he wasn't able to walk or do any of those things for himself, but just lost the joy of living. Okay, yeah, yes. So, all right, so now I am going to also wanted to answer this question too, that, okay, let me see if I get the YouTube handle correct. Give me 1 second here. Let me gotta put this in. Okay, I just wanna make sure I got this YouTube handle straight here so I can answer the question properly. Okay, so there's someone who has a handle called @Bojangle and they had asked what I thought about shea butter. They said that for them, they've tried using extra virgin olive oil on their skin, but it makes them break out. And what do I think of shea butter? I think shea butter is great, actually. When I was living in France back in, God, the 90s, there's a very large African community there. At least there was a very large African community there. And there was, you know, a series of shops. It was kind of called like Little Africa. There's like a series of shops that sold, of course, different products from Senegal and places like that. And they used to sell little plastic baggies, you know, full of little balls of shea butter that were about this big, and you could buy a bag of those for about the equivalent of, you know, a couple dollars. So I tried it. I mainly got it for my hair because my hair used to tangle and knot, and shea butter was great for detangling, you know, matted hair. It's also great to do a deep what's the word I'm looking for? A deep hydration. And so, of course, also I was like, oh, let me just try this. So, shea butter is great. It's from the nut of a tree. I believe it originally comes from Ghana. It's very rich in vitamin E. It's good for scarring and all of that. My point is this, as always, my grandfather really had a talent for giving tips for lifestyle that you could find these things in your local supermarket, right? Extra virgin olive oil, green tea, black beans, barley, and so on and so forth. And that's the beauty of what he shared. By the same token, he also used to say the chemicals in everyone's body is different, right? So something that I do may not agree with you. If it doesn't agree with you, then don't do it. If you find something else that agrees with you more, then that's what you should do. Okay, now someone on here said something about wheat not being on the list. It is on the list, but it's on the list as a snack because people always say, well, did your grandfather eat snack food? Okay, so snack food for him was seeds and nuts. He was very fond of macadamia nuts. He was fond of cashews. He was fond of almonds. I remember there being like Brazil nuts when I was a kid going over to his house, and there were Brazil nuts, for example. Um, there you have it. So he didn't eat candy, he didn't have candy as snacks. Or again, as you all know, fruit, his fruit salad, his famous fruit salad, or bananas. He was very fond of bananas. Um, and also, if you go back and read the notes, he would have a cup of green tea and he would have a slice of whole wheat bread with some raw peanut butter on it. Not that sugary peanut butter, just the raw peanut butter, right? Because peanuts, raw peanut butter, legumes, it's good for your mind, it's good for your memory, just like blueberries are good for your memory, right? There's foods that help your brain, and that's one of them. So go back and take a look at that list again, okay? It's not like huge, but it's there. Yeah, I mean, I eat wheat bread. Although I love pumpernickel bread. I love the darker breads, and I like real bread. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be next to a real bakery where they actually bake it from scratch and it's not sitting in the supermarket for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, that's the best. If you can have something stone ground with real grains, that's the best. There's actually a bakery that I like very much. It's like a Danish bakery, and their bread is out of this world. When I eat their bread, then I realize, oh, this must have been what Jesus said when he meant that, wheat is the staff of life. So it's not like today, these we can find these things, but we have to do a little bit more searching for them. It's not commonplace the way it used to be in the ancient world before we started putting additives and chemicals and preservatives to ship food, thousands of miles away and then have it sit on a shelf for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, right? So the fresher that you can eat, the better off that you are. And if you can find a real baker in your area that actually uses real grains that haven't been sprayed with pesticides and that are stone ground and that you're going to have to eat within the week and maybe freeze the other half. Otherwise, it's going to go bad on you. That's the kind of thing that you want to be eating. Okay, so now let me see here. That's okay, no problem. Yeah, I mean the way the foods and stuff that we eat here in general, what people have been given, which passes as food, is not food, really. Okay, so that was what at Bojangles' nose. I hope that didn't get too muddied, but yes, shea butter is great. And then he was very kind to say something about my own channel. Well, I had my own channel, and guess what? I don't post on it anymore because what's the point? People need to come over here. People need to come over here, and I feel like this is more. My mission is to preserve my grandfather's legacy. That's it. Um, I want to say that I used to have a lot of fun talking to Bernando just about just different things, different things in nature and their healing properties. We used to get very excited about that and talk about that. So again, I try and bring out the underlying principles of a food, right? And how they work. I think the difficulty is that, the way that we have been spoken to about food in America and the United States of America is that everything is always very trendy. It's always like, yes, use this thing because it's 5 times more rich and whatever than this thing. But the point is, while that may be true, it's also important to understand that there's things that we have right here in our own countries that God gave us in our own locale that work very well. And so eating local, supporting your local farmers is very, very important. So, okay. And then the last question is someone in here wanted to know, why do I not eat fish and why don't why don't I eat meat? Um, well, I don't like fish, to be perfectly honest. I don't really care for it. I don't need it. Um, and my grandfather ate very little meat. I don't eat meat because I don't believe in slaughtering animals for the sake of my taste buds. And I find that I eat very, very well without it. Also, uh, you don't really hear in general, of people dying of horrible cancers because they ate a life filled filled with fruits and vegetables, right? The same cannot be said for red meats. It's very hard to digest. It sits in your colon. And, it just creates all kinds of problems. There's also the auxiliary problems of the amount of fossil fuels that it uses, the oils. If you've ever seen an aerial photograph of a slaughterhouse and see the amount of blood that is coming out, from the slaughterhouse, it's truly horrific. The way the animals are treated in there as if they didn't have feelings. The fact that, you know, calves are taken away from their mothers very young, the way they separate the male calves and leave them isolated and feed them, a very kind of anemic diet and then slaughter them. I mean, it's just the whole thing of it, I'm just not down with that. I'm not down with it at all. Um I mean, the kind of cuisine that I like, since you're asking, um, is that I like really good home style cooked vegetarian Indian food. That's my jam. Along with, all the other things that my grandfather taught me that I really like and that I really appreciate. Um, if I'm gonna get fancy and cook a meal or something, I'm going to, make those dishes. So, just as a point of reference, there is a very sublime vegetarian cuisine coming out of India, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. It's very refined, it's very sophisticated, and depending on what region of the country that you're in, whether you're in the north, where it tends to be colder, or whether you're in the south, where it tends to be very warm, There's also regional differences in cuisine as well. So there you have it. I want to thank you for spending time with me today. I try and present a balanced view. Everyone is coming from a different space and a different place. Uh, I'm not a fanatic per se. I do have my own principles that I stick to, and there you have it. Okay, well, I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye now.